Hello, everyone. Welcome to Overtime. Joining me tonight is Asandering. We're going to try to do a reasonably brief show and just cover really sort of what's happened over the last 24 hours. We had a marvelous conversation. I hope you guys will check that out. It was after dark, open hang. We had a lot of people come in. We had Commander Macmillan come in. That's always marvelous when he can join us. So it was a good hang, and we got to pick his brain on a lot of stuff. So. What do we have? So far, while there's a lot going on, believe it or not, this is only about a third of the Russian forces to have engaged. So they still have 2/3 that they're waiting on. Russia has used its veto power to block a United Nations Security Council resolution condemning Russia. And at this point, the Russian president says that the forces have encircled Kiev, which in fact they have. We're going to discuss that. They've appear to have attempted to go in. We have some footage that we believe is of basically a successful repelling of them. They have taken an airbase just north of Kiev, and apparently are flying in supplies and troops. So they've basically they can take it whenever they want. According to a senior U.S. defense official, the Russian forces are taking, quote, more resistance than they had expected. I can't give you an exact geographic location of where they are, but they are not moving on Kiev as fast as they had anticipated or would otherwise be able to do. The mayor of Kiev has said that he believes Vladimir Putin has, quote, lost reality. The way Russian works, that would make more sense in the native Russian. I know we all get it. It's actually, that is a correct quote, but that he has lost reality, and that as of this moment, both the mayor and his son are considering themselves regular soldiers. They've taken up arms and are preparing to defend the city hand to hand if they have to. Quote, I don't have another choice. I have to do that, he told a reporter from Good Morning Britain. Sean Penn is in Kiev, and before anyone makes a joke about this, he's actually won a number of awards for humanitarian causes. He was in the process of filming a documentary about the Russian invasion and chose to stay behind. He is, nobody knows exactly where he is right now, and if we did, we wouldn't say anything, but he is in full combat gear, filming a documentary and presumably very close to the front lines. The office of the president of Ukraine has said, quote, our country is grateful to him for showing grateful to him for such a show of courage and honesty. As we discussed before, the small contingent of Ukrainian border guards defending Snake Isle were all killed. They were given the highest honor, the Hero of Ukraine, by the president of Ukraine. Quote, all border guards died heroically and did not give up. So I apologize, I misspoke. They will be awarded posthumously the Hero of Ukraine. It has not been awarded yet. They famously, when told by the Russian government and a Russian warship to surrender, they told the Russians to go fuck themselves. Literally, that's what they said. That's like a direct quote. Russia's defense minister has said that Russian forces have destroyed 118 military facilities in Ukraine, including 11 military air bases, 13 surface-to-air missile systems, and that Russia had downed 5 Ukrainian military planes, 1 helicopter, and 5 drones, and that more than 150 Ukrainian servicemen have been killed. There's no way to verify this. This is Russia's defense minister spokesman. Obviously, there have been losses, but we don't know. What we do know is that, according to Britain's Defense Secretary Ben Wallace, that they say that they believe their intelligence services say that Russia had very specific goals to have achieved by this point, and they have failed to do so. They believe that, in fact, they had intended to have Kiev by this point, and that they have not met any of the objectives that they had, even for the first day of the invasion of Ukraine. He said that in fact, Kiev's airport has been returned to Ukrainian officials, and at this point, Russian forces have lost at least 450 troops and a significant number of attacks, and have failed to even begin their campaign in the Donbass region, which he believes is incoming, but they had anticipated doing that already and haven't. The Ukrainian capital of Kiev has been under bombardment really all day, with a number of missile strikes and rockets crashing into buildings. We did report on a Russian fighter that had been downed. It had been blown out of the sky, landed on an apartment building. We now have our daylight pictures of the apartment building, which actually looks like in better shape than what we were expecting. But that fire is, as we're being told, is as a result of the airplane crashing into it, or crashing from the top. There are an estimated 2.8 million people remaining. President Volodymyr Zielinski has said that he believes that he is, of course, target number one in the advance, and he is staying in Kiev. Let's see. They believe now that the Russian Federation's objective in Ukraine is, quote, to secure control of the population and change the regime, according to UK Chief of Defense Intelligence, Sir Jim Hocknell. Quote, Russian forces continue to advance on two axes towards Kiev. Their objective is to encircle the capital, to secure the population, and to change the regime. So let's see. Is there anything else? No, I don't think there's anything else. That's what we're looking at. There has been some fighting in Kiev today. We believe that. Okay, I don't know what that's an image. Okay, that's the outside. What I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in here on what's happened in the city of Kiev. You can see this is inside the city limits. This is now actual fighting. It's not just planes falling and landing on things, although there hasn't been a whole amount. There was some fighting outside the Kiev Zoo. We're going to play that for you in a minute. And that appears to have been repelled. There was troops coming in on Kiev Avenue. Those have been repelled. We have, I believe, footage of that one. And we have a few more pieces of footage that we're going to bring in. We're going to bring in one more thing that I want to mention. We believe these reports are credible. We believe this is accurate. We haven't confirmed it, but the news source is reliable. It's a smaller news source. We do at this point believe it's reliable. So I would like to put this up. What you're seeing here is an engineer, Skakun Vitali. He was part of a he was part of a military group. They were there to stop a tank column from going over the bridge. I believe, if I remember correctly, this was the bridge, a bridge that was being used by the Northern Column advancing on Kiev. He volunteered to stay behind and leave the mines, but to leave mines to detonate the bridge, but for whatever reason was unable to leave and detonated it while he was there. So. And we talked about this and about the fact that they're obviously going to get around it, but that's what we're seeing. We've also got a message from an anonymous we're going to play, and we've got a few other things we're going to do. But that's the rundown. That's what we have. That's essentially what's been happening since last time we met. NATO has met. NATO has condemned this and said that they are going to dramatically increase. Well, I shouldn't say dramatically. They suggested. Oh, hey, look. They suggested that they're going to dramatically increase the support that they're giving. They are giving weapons, ammunition. We know that 50,000 people have escaped and fled into Poland. There's another at least 100,000 that are attempting to get out. Anybody out between the ages of 18 and 40, any males, have been banned from leaving the country. 2.7 million left in the city, and it looks like they may try to starve them out. I don't know what they're going to do, but that's what we're seeing. So, Zandring, how are you, and what are your thoughts?
I'm doing a little okay, I guess. Been trying to get more stuff done on the house and pay attention to what's going on at the same time. That's a lot of fun. So things aren't moving nearly as fast as at first it seemed it should. So I guess we give them a little bit more credit for competence than they seem to be displaying. So this may actually start to get ugly, because it doesn't look like Ukraine is definitely going to just roll over and let this happen. So
you made an interesting point. if Ukraine just gave up, there'd be a lot less loss of life. And nobody's suggesting that they should, but that's kind of a terrible choice to make. And it's by their having competence in defending themselves, it's going to get ugly.
Yeah, generally, I mean, if you want to minimize the number of casualties in a conflict, generally you want to go in with overwhelming force and end the war as quickly as you possibly can. The more protracted wars get, the more casualties there are. In this particular case, I'm not entirely sure that would be true. The faster Russia takes over Ukraine, the faster they can start ethnic cleansing and ideological cleansing. So I don't know that it would actually save anybody for Russia to take them over quickly or for Ukraine to give up. And of course, the Ukrainians get a vote in this. They don't want their country taken over either, and they believe it's worth fighting for. So, I'm not suggesting they should give up. And it was just a kind of a note on casualties and how ugly things can get.
Well, and we do know, and I think that's worth remembering, which is basically orders for ethnic cleansing have been given, aside from LGBTQ and any other number of minorities. They've also said that anyone who basically is not, cannot demonstrate essentially a Russian heritage, so have a stronger Ukrainian heritage, kill them. And we talked about how they might try to make those determinations, but we're already looking at some terrible stuff. So I'm as my understanding is, the message from Anonymous is pretty powerful. I haven't actually heard it yet, so I'll get to it as quickly as possible. But I do want to hit two other pieces of footage. They're short, so let's get to that. And so this was the first one. I believe this is from last night. And this is like I said, it's a short one here. And then my understanding, the next one we're going to play is the repelling of forces along Kiev. So let's play this one. A lot of the lights are out because they've been asking the citizens to keep the lights off. It makes it harder to hit areas. I don't think that's well, that may be the repelling of forces. I don't know. I think okay, yeah, I think there was a column coming up that road, and the column is left, so we're not actually seeing the repelling of the forces. But apparently they were that's where they were repelled. We also have a message from Anonymous. You guys, and we'll be hearing it with me. So for the first time, I thought it was on the interface. It's not. It's going to take me just 1 sec to grab that, and I'm just going to find where I put it. So give me 1 second there. Lots moving on. So yeah, I switched. I was grabbing footage, and I went right past that. So let me go snag that footage one more time. But it's, and I keep. I mean, what's so amazing to me is how many times people forget their history, and what was considered one of the most brutal and terrible sieges in human history is the 900-day Siege of Leningrad. This is a siege that is very hard to read about and think about and talk about because of its brutality, and it was considered one of the bravest acts of World War II. And Russia has said they will always remember the heroes of Leningrad, who, had they given up and had they fallen, it would have allowed the German army to continue their way into Soviet Russia. And they may have even just saved everybody in the war by doing nothing but sitting there and starving to death and not giving up. And we now have Ukraine encircled, and it looks like if they can't get in, they're going to do the same thing to the Ukrainians. This is the very Russians that 50 years ago were heroes for resisting this exact thing. It's an irony that I know that does not strike a lot of people, but if you've studied it, is pretty shocking. So, all right, okay, and I guess we've got Aftermath of the Zoo. So yeah, I will like that. Thank you. But let's hear from Anonymous, and I will. Perfect. That's perfect. Thank you. All right. So this is a message from Anonymous. If everything's been configured correctly, which I suspect, surprisingly, it has. You should be able to hear it. Let me know in the live chat. If you can't, as Andrew, let me know if you miss it. So we'll play it. We'll play it through, and we'll see what we got.
Waiting for you to respond to our most recent request, but we find ourselves growing impatient of your foot dragging. Unfortunately, it seems you have made the option to ignore our presence, and therefore we have decided to dedicate an operation specifically for you. A present of sorts. Do you perhaps remember the time the collective defaced Roskimor's website in 2018? Mr. Putin, do you remember when you lost to Afghanistan a database belonging to the Ministry of Defense website was leaked by the anonymous collective? This database contained email addresses and passwords. This information was released on Twitter and it is now public information. Your recent attempt to threaten Finland and Sweden is shameful. You threatened to invade those countries if they join NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We took down websites of the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, Kremlin, Russia Today, and many other Russian government-associated websites. Vladimir Putin, is it a coincidence that Anonymous thinks not? We plan to expose what has been hidden for years, with the powers of Anonymous bearing down on you and your corrupt cronies. It's only a matter of time until we uncover the dirt you've been trying to hide from the community you lied your way into leading. From the depths of your closet, no skeleton will be left unturned. We are now asking for you to restore the rights of the Ukrainian people and resign as an elected official. You have failed to protect those in vulnerable living conditions. You have failed your civic and moral duties as a public official. And you have failed those you purport to govern in your continual lapse of honesty. This is a call out to all other anonymous. It's time to put Vladimir Putin's proverbial money where his mouth is. Do your urge to dig and leave no stone unturned. Vladimir Putin, we provided you with ample time to remedy our grievances and provided a bevy of options. But you have decided to create a much larger battle. We will never forgive the lies, and although you may have, we will never forget the lives that have been lost under your regime. It is too late to expect us.
All right, that was a message delivered by Anonymous. We've reported already that Anonymous has essentially declared war on Putin's regime. They have already begun attacking the websites, and presumably, we have no way of verifying this, but at least they've attacked the websites, that we know, because those are down. But they also have presumably been attacking the communications infrastructure for the military inside Russia. Whether they've done anything for those outside, we don't know. But that was a message from Anonymous, and then we now have also what is, I believe, footage from the aftermath of the attack on the zoo. Wow, I'm getting a little tired. No, as much as we think that Putin would attack baby pandas and puppies, and he probably would, there was no attack on the zoo. There was an attack outside the zoo. This is the closest footage that we have of that. We don't know even really what we're looking at there, but this is within the Kiev city limits, as I understand it. It certainly appears to be. And we do have a super chat. I haven't gotten to that yet, but thank you very much, Michael. We appreciate your support as always. If I sound a little tired, it's not just that I'm a little tired. This is difficult stuff to sort through and cover. So your support is very much appreciated. And keep in mind, I do sometimes I get a little choked up, especially since I've read my history. So this is not easy. But it's also not easy for the people who are dropping the raw data of this, including some pretty horrific images into the news channel of the Discord. It's the only way to go through this, as somebody had pointed out. And I don't think they were trying to troll, but somebody had asked, should we really be live streaming elements of war? And I don't think it was a troll, and I don't even think I think it was well meant, and I think the answer was what they were expecting and hoping for, which is yes, we should. And the reason is because the more people who see it, the fewer people who want to do it. We want to, if we want to end war, easiest way to do that is make sure people see what it really looks like, and that's not easy. And we've been keeping some of that back because there's where it's gratuitous and there's no point, but where it's newsworthy, we're going to put it up, and we're going to get demonetized, as we always do. So thank you, Michael. Thank you to the people who have been putting their mental health in some jeopardy to help. And as I've said, oh, it looks like I'm echoing. All right, I'll get to that. Sorry. All right, I read you, Pat. I'll get to that. I do want to find the cause of the echo. Not sure. Okay, I'm not sure. So I assume everybody's reporting an echo. So I'll get to that in a second.
That's hilarious.
What?
Can you copy that picture and send it to me?
All right. So, anyways, yeah, no, I mean, Anon is a little crazy and scary, and but there they are. So I'm assuming we still got an echo, and I honestly I don't know the. Actually, I have an idea of what the cause is, so I'll try to deal with that. Yeah, there's things we can't. Anyways, join the Discord if you're interested in either contributing or just being a part of the discussion more. Is Andring, any thoughts? Well, the video was echoing. Thank you for correcting that. Yeah. Before I do that, is there any? I think I know why it was echoing. Was it sufficient? Were you guys able to hear it? I'd actually just assume not playing it again if I don't have to. But if you guys feel like you did not accurately hear it, and that there's a point in replaying it, let me know. But yes, I'm sorry, Zandring, please go.
Oh, war is dirty, nasty, and brutal, and I think that the sanitation of it, or the ideally, what word am I wanting there?
Either the idealization of it, or even the romanticization of it, and the yeah.
Both of those things. I mean, you see that in the kind of the gun nut culture or the militia type cultures, and it's like I don't think you guys really understand how brutal this can be. There was I think it was in the Czech War. There was a city that was laid under siege for a little over a year. And one of the people in there is in the prepper community, and he talks about what he went through in that year. And it was brutal. And it's like, I don't think people quite understand how bad that is. And we should be wanting to avoid it at all costs. And of course, the bad guys get a vote in this too. So it's like, I can not want war all I want, but the other guy gets a vote. And we may end up with war. I do think it's interesting, or hilariously not funny, that Russia was able to use its veto power in the UN to block a resolution against Russia for invading Ukraine.
Okay, hold on one second. All right, Pat, I've sent you the link if you're in the live chat. That link is actually the same. That link should never change. So that's just a permanent link that will always get you to the lobby, and I can bring people in and out from there. So it's the same link you used last time, but I've resent it. So hopefully we'll be good with that. So yeah, okay. So it looks like everyone was at least able to hear. Okay, heard about 40% of it. Nobody could hear. I think it's worth hearing. So we will play that again. I am going to have to figure out now. That's actually odd. Now I am confused as to what was causing that echo. So we'll try it again. If there's an echo, we'll try it again, because it's at least worth hearing. It's certainly newsworthy. Anonymous is an extraordinarily dangerous organization, I think, for any number of reasons. And I know they see themselves as heroes. I don't think so. But it's a war, and if they're on our side, I think we should take the advice. Oh, I would take the help. There was what I also wanted to hit was, so we've got some interesting. It looks like support is deteriorating rapidly. All right, so we've got him. So give me 1 sec, and I will because I just heard Pat coming in here. So there he is. All right, so Pat will be joining us momentarily. I did. There he is. So we'll get Pat up in a minute, but he is here, and he's hot. So we'll deal with that. The support does appear to be deteriorating at home pretty rapidly, and there could be nothing better than that. Apparently Russian lawmaker Mikhail Mataveyevich has, who had voted to recognize Donetsk and Luhansk, which was basically what was able to trigger this, because then they were going in for humanitarian aid, has called for an immediate end to attacks on Ukraine. He says, quote, "I voted for Russia to become a shield, not for Kiev to be bombarded." So we'll see. Yeah. So Russia was, they were attempting to take the power plant, which last I heard was evacuated, and everything's being automated. Then the one other one was, I guess the U.S. government had asked Ukrainian President Zielinski to evacuate Kiev, and he turned down the offer and said, quote, "The fight is here. I need ammunition, not a ride." So that's where we stand. Pat, thank you for joining us. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. Was trying to get in earlier with the earlier show, but had technical difficulties of my own. So,
well, you wouldn't be welcome on In Time if you weren't plagued with technical difficulties. It's kind of our thing now. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. So, what are your thoughts on everything so far?
Well, my comment is more of for people to kind of take a deep breath in their analysis. Commander Macmillan's a great resource. One of the issues when trying to gauge the effectiveness of urban combat is to understand there are different ways to achieve objectives in an urban setting. To think that you have to control the entire city to control a city is outdated and outmoded thinking, largely in modern urban combat operations. What we were seeing initially, day one, looked to be very targeted. You seize airports, you seize critical infrastructure, largely to make it impossible for the civilian, or extremely difficult for the civilian populace and civilian administrative government to function, and also puts heavy burden on occupying defensive military assets. That would be the Ukrainians. So when we're sitting there looking about, like, why haven't the Russians rolled in and flattened the city? Because if they could have used basically special operations, our equivalent of our special forces, Russian special forces, to seize those key centers, then the issue in Kiev and other places would have been much different. It appears that those operations have been less successful based on what U.S. and NATO allies are stating in various news sources, but it's really hard to tell where the Russians are at in their overall plan for achieving their own military objectives. I would be very remiss if I said, yes, you're going to hear the U.S. going, they have not done this, they have not done that. Sorry, I have some background. But the issue being that, we don't know what the Russians' plans were, and for U.S. military personnel to say, well, this is how we would do it, and this is what the Russians were thinking, there's a whole lot of rabbits and hats going on with that kind of analysis. Second thing I would just caution everybody is, initially the Ukrainian, there's a lot of news going on we're looking at, but the Ukrainian Air Force had earlier some success that wasn't expected by the Russians. Basically what was the Ukrainian Air Force appears to be dissipated now. Jets were forced down in Romania. It looks like the Ukrainian Air Force inflicted what casualties they could on Russian air forces, but they've been largely neutralized now. Whether or not how much damage was done to the I don't think the Russians expected there to be much air resistance, and what they received was greater than what they had anticipated, so that may have changed some of their tactics. But what will happen now is, now that they've been unable to appears to surgically seize parts of cities and objectives, I think now what you'll see is a more traditional ground-based approach into the city itself, which was, I think, we're seeing develop in the last 4 to 6 hours. And whether or not the military hardware that's been put in place by the U.S., particularly anti-tank weaponry, will be effective will be the critical. The Ukrainians' resolve, which appears to be high at this point, and the capabilities of man-portable anti-tank will be what determines the fate of most of Ukraine at this point.
If they've got the river, and it looks like, Odessa is certainly not working, but even if Odessa was, Odessa is not going to be able to supply this. If they've got it looks like they can easily stop any flow of goods up and down the river. If they've encircled the city, they can keep supplies from going in. So, what options would they have in Kiev at this point if they either just go slowly or, just wait them out?
Well, that's the if again, surgical would have maybe have already brought this to an end. Now it looks like it will be a more traditional or conventional form of urban occupation and suppression. This is going to be house-style fighting if the Russians want to use it. And I will tell you that while special operations groups are able to do a lot, those are limited capacities for militaries, just like the U.S. I mean, for every Delta Force or SEAL team member we have hundreds of general service personnel, if you want to call them infantrymen but basically general troops. That's what Russia is going to have to rely upon largely to combat this partially civilianized force, is what I'm getting from various news sources. You were mentioning earlier the calling up of the Ukrainian militia and reservists, and any able-bodied man willing to throw a Kalashnikov into his shoulder and engage Russian forces. I think that was definitely not something the Russians were expecting. I think they were engaging or believing there'd be an earlier capitulation. There may have been an attempt to actually remove heads of state in Ukraine, and it appears that different news sources are reporting different things, and that appears to have been unsuccessful. So given that, that's the reason you're hearing Russian news sources telling Ukrainians to throw over their government, because ultimately what the Russians want in Ukraine, at minimum, is regime change. Ultimately, it would be control of the country, but they have first tier objectives, second tier, and third tier objectives. That again, this is all within Putin's mind. Anybody who thinks Putin is just a mad raving madman, I caution people to say things like that. He's a former KGB head. This is not someone who's given to his thinking. May be irrational by Western standards and may seem insane, but this is bred with a certain amount of expertise in what he's doing. He may have
underestimated the
underestimated
resistance.
Ukrainians and overestimated his own forces' capabilities. That sometimes happens when you rely upon surgical use of specialized operation groups. The Ukrainians may have, as much as we're saying, well, the Ukrainians weren't prepared here and the Ukrainians weren't prepared there, they may have been prepared just good enough to blunt the spear, and that's what we're probably seeing. But again, the next days from day 3 to 5 of the initial attack is going to tell us the fate of Ukraine. I also, as far as a massive conventional attack on Kiev, I will warn and caution people from saying things like sparse, heavy fighting. Where the fighting's happening, how much shooting going on, is not always indicative of the tide of war and battle. What we're gonna see, it's what areas are being seized of the city and how effective those seizures are in controlling them against counterattacks. The second thing I would caution people about is trying to determine this in a conventional warfare sense. As Russia entered this space, there were already reports of civilian casualties. If Russian forces are found to be committing ethnic cleansing and engaging in just gross acts against the civilian populace, this is what will cue a non-NATO response from the EU and other people. Right now, NATO is a defensive body, but NATO could easily transition to a war footing if humanitarian issues become of concern. It doesn't take a whole lot to get from, hey, Ukraine's not a NATO member, so whatever happens, to, hey, they're committing ethnic genocide, and now we have tens of thousands of ethnic Ukrainians being killed by Russian military forces, to cause global sentiments to change to where now we actually have U.S. troops and other coalition and quickly formed coalition allies to help, quote unquote, peacekeeping and protection of civilian populaces in Ukraine. It's really that's how precarious the situation is right now. I don't think people realize how close we are to what, I don't want to call it a world war, but something akin to U.S. military involvement in Eastern Europe. It's the likelihood from yesterday to today has increased significantly as Russia was unable to appear to have obtained significant objectives in certain key centers, Kiev being one of them. And the last thing I would just say is that, and I can't stay on for too much longer. People should really worry tonight and tomorrow about how Russia reacts. If we see mass blanket carpeting of areas and the infliction of typically, severe casualties upon the civilian populace, we may see something entirely different occur as far as how the world's going to react to this. Russia doesn't want this to become something where people in other countries are going to all of a sudden get aggrieved enough where they, when the French start going, okay, it's time for French forces to go into Ukraine because we can't stand by this anymore, that would change the disposition of the war. This was supposed to be quick, fast, and modestly not dirty, and it appears that's not what's occurring in Ukraine at this point.
Okay, aware that you're very short on time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a question, but I want Zandring to ask any questions that he has. So ignore my question if he's got any questions. If he doesn't, then get to me. But he takes priority. But my question is, we know that he's getting significant blowback now. Well, we don't know. As much as we can tell domestically, how much more would he have to get before it maybe has he starts looking for an escape route of some kind? Does it really matter? I talk a little bit about that, but it's much more important to me that Zandring get to ask any questions he's got if he's got them. Zandring, you're up.
That's kind of the question I'm wondering, because I'm not super up on Russia itself. Is there a danger of issues at home causing them to stop this or interrupt this?
So I again, I'm not an expert on Russia other than in generalities, but I do not see a scenario that Putin didn't plan for public unrest. Russia's been having increasing anti-Putin sympathies for at least the last decade. Anybody who can, has been to Europe and watched European news, anytime there is some type of protest, Putin tends to crush it hard. And I wouldn't use this for it's not beyond Putin to use these current civil unrests for some form of shift in even his control. After this, he'll be able to talk about anti-Russian, disloyalists in his own country who, because of their anti-patriotic activities, were actually part of the problem with Russian efforts in Ukraine. Putin's a totalitarian, and totalitarians tend to react to loss or inconvenience in rather bad ways. So I don't think Putin was worried about blowback. I think he's just going to manipulate that blowback as best as he can, given the situation.
I'm going to insert this one because this has been asked repeatedly, and it's a good question. What happens if Putin dies tomorrow?
I think hostilities in Ukraine end immediately. If we're talking like a regime change in Russia through less than natural causes,
yes.
I think we have a new totalitarian regime that's much more akin to interaction with the West than Putin was. But again, Russian politics currently being what they are, the oligarchs in Russia will then determine the new Putin or Putin-esque figure that will. Now, Putin's going to be one of those people that will go into history in many ways, like a Stalin and a Lenin and a Ceausescu. But he's got his own issues to bear. The other issue too is anybody in the United States right now who's watching this and believes that there aren't covert military assets, American military assets in Ukraine, you're naive. Either these are, central intelligence elements or, covert elements of the U.S. military. There are eyes on the ground by U.S. personnel in Ukraine as we speak, and I can almost guarantee that based on past operations in other parts of the world.
All right. Is Andrew anything else? I did want to interject that question, but I really would like to see you ask any remaining questions that you got, if you've got any.
So we're looking at essentially something that was tried to be quick and efficient and targeted. It ended up mostly failing, which has brought them back to more of a traditional style, or at least historically traditional style assault. How fast do you think this is that they're going to start trying to move? I mean, are they going to really ramp things up, or do you think they're just going to kind of muddle through this whole thing? Because it seems like a lot of stuff has been muddled, and that there doesn't seem to be quite the command and control that I would have originally thought.
So I think what we're seeing now is, within 72 hours, I'm predicting, based on, again, I just read what's available to anyone who wants to spend the time reading through it. Within 72 to 100 hours, Ukraine's going to have spent through a lot of the hardware, the anti-tank capabilities, ground defense systems and other things that the U.S. and other of the few people that in Europe that have given them some support, they're going to largely burn through the best of their defensive technologies. Their air force is effectively no longer an issue for the Russians, and now it's the capabilities to engage Russian air and Russian tanks, both surface to air and then surface to surface missiles against tanks, and man-portable stuff. This is it. Once those capabilities are gone, the Ukrainian resistance will end. How much of it they have and how effective it is and how skilled they are in using it is going to determine how Russia responds. Russia attempted to do this surgery first with a scalpel, and now they're going to do it with a meat cleaver within 100 hours of the initial invasion. 72 to 100 hours out, they have to change tempo because their initial tempo will have been blunted to the point that special operations will become much more difficult to use. It appears their use, again, these reports are scattered, but it appears that the Ukrainians have been fairly effective at knocking down some Russian helicopter assets. And if that's the case, the Russians aren't going to be as predisposed to using those tactics for insertion for more surgical strikes. They're going to rely on conventional ground placement and advancement. Again, armored vehicles and armored personnel carriers and tanks to breach the defenses rather than have surgical insertion and then have advancement from those surgically inserted units, or defense until relieved from their surgically inserted units.
Awesome. Well, thank you for spending the time and giving us your thoughts. You already covered some of the other. You already answered some of the other questions that I had, like what would it take for NATO or for the European forces to actually get involved to try and stop anything. You already went over that.
I think if we start seeing what we can clearly identify as war crimes, I do think that even Americans who are war weary will be predisposed to helping the Ukrainians, as will many members of the European Union. I don't think everybody's going to jump on board, but I think if the U.S. plus 4 to 6 key members form a coalition and offer a single ultimatum, you could see limited and to some extent less than limited conventional action in Ukraine as peacekeepers / humanitarian relief. One of the issues in the United Nations is the engagement of genocide. So there is that issue that Russia keeps voting against until they're the member that's the causal member, and then the UN can do what they need to do. But I don't think the UN was going to send peacekeepers before a coalition of European states and the US form a coalition before that anyway. And it's probably going to be NATO members.
Yeah, you're aware of the crematoriums that they've got at the back of the. All right, so now ostensibly, that's pretty morbid, and a few people have brought up. I would have to believe that's demoralizing to the troops, realizing that if you're shot and killed, they're just going to toss you into a thing. And so ostensibly, what we've heard is the reason that these mobile crematoriums are being used is to blunt the effect of bringing the bodies home and make it harder to calculate the actual losses because you don't have bodies to show for it. I've been concerned that that's not going to be the only purpose of the crematoriums. Am I being hyperbolic? Is my mind just going crazy, or is there a possibility that it's for war crimes?
Yeah, sure, it's a possibility, but it's also a possibility that the Russians just don't like sending dead soldiers home in bags like we do in the United States in coffins. I mean, the reality is that we can assume nefarious, which I typically do, but this will be something that will be detected by intelligence services around the world. If ethnic cleansing starts occurring, I do not think that, again, like Bosnia, they're not going to be able to hide it. And the world's watching right now because it's already happened. Again, the Tartars in Crimea are a decade ago. This is Russian. The Russians do this, and they use ostensibly the cover of, though they're not Russian forces, they're Russian aligned militia slash, pro-Russian elements, but they're not part of the Russian military. Again, that was the dodge of many governments from last 100 years that have committed genocide. It wasn't us. It was these group of people that, we gave them guns and we trained them, but we weren't in charge of them. And I think that's what we're going to see in Ukraine. Again, Ukraine and Russia have a complicated history. But to think that, they're basically the same people, that's a naive Western view. The Ukrainians have been a suppressed people by Russia for a long time, and they're considered an ethnic minority and a inferior people by many Russians even today. This is just the history of the two powers in relation to each other.
All right, let's what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the anonymous clip, and then if you can still stick around for a little bit, I may ask you a bit about the history of this, but I know we are impeding on your time. I did promise the anonymous clip, so I'm going to play that one, and I think it's 2.5 minutes. And if there is an echo, let me know. I'll stop it. We'll continue with the questioning while I try to fix the sound issue, but I believe it's fixed, so let's give this a shot here. Oh, and then of course I took it off the screen. I don't know why. There we go, and let's go.
Waiting for you to respond to our most recent request, but we find ourselves growing impatient of your foot dragging. Unfortunately, it seems you have made the option to ignore our presence, and therefore we have decided to dedicate an operation specifically for you. A present of sorts. Do you perhaps remember the time the collective defaced Roskimordz's website in 2018? Mr. Putin, do you remember when you lost to Afghanistan? A database belonging to the Ministry of Defense website was leaked by the anonymous collective. This database contained email addresses and passwords. This information was released on Twitter and it is now public information. Your recent attempt to threaten Finland and Sweden is shameful. You threaten to invade those countries if they join NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We took down the websites of the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, Kremlin, Russia Today, and many other Russian government-associated websites. Vladimir Putin, is it a coincidence that Anonymous thinks not? We plan to expose what has been hidden for years, with the powers of Anonymous bearing down on you and your corrupt cronies. It's only a matter of time until we uncover the dirt you've been trying to hide from the community you lied your way into leading. From the depths of your closet, no skeleton will be left unturned. We are now asking for you to restore the rights of the Ukrainian people and resign as an elected official. You have failed to protect those in vulnerable living conditions. You have failed your civic and moral duties as a public official, and you have failed those you purport to govern in your continual lapse of honesty. This is a call out to all other Anonymous. It's time to put Vladimir Putin's proverbial money where his mouth is. Do your research to dig, and leave no stone unturned. Vladimir Putin, we provided you with ample time to remedy our grievances and provided a bevy of options. But you have decided to create a much larger battle. We will never forgive the lies, and although you may have, we will never forget the lives that have been lost under your regime. It is too late to expect us.
All right. Well, they picked a dramatic choice of music. So, if you have any thoughts on that, I'd like to hear that. And then I'd also like to hear Putin essentially is saying that Crimea does not exist. It's a colonization of the U.S. And I'd like to understand just a little bit more as to what his defense for that argument is.
So, as far as Anonymous goes, again, that's just something that can't make the average Russian less than nervous, an attempt to destabilize various aspects of the Russian state. Vladimir Putin, depending on various Russian actors and how his cyber defensive capabilities are, I should be fairly nervous. It shows that what's going on. But then, I would expect U.S. and allied cyber intel units to be doing the same thing. I predict there's already a U.S.-led cyber attacks going on with Russia through our defensive capabilities. This is, again, whatever the U.S. is doing at this point to help the Ukrainians isn't going to be just solely, ammo for their Kalashnikovs and anti-tank weaponry. I think there's a concerted effort both in and outside of Ukraine by the U.S. military and government. So, I would be nervous, but I'm not Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, well, I don't even know if he really understands what anonymous is, because we've had that discussion. But all that notwithstanding, so I think most Americans are a little confused and are sitting there saying, well, how on earth could Putin ever say that America is responsible for cleaving Ukraine off of Russia? Or what's the argument there? The historical argument?
So really, it was, if you want to consider it a victory, the end of the Cold War is largely a reason that the former republics that ended up being, gaining independence at the end of the conclusion of the Cold War and the formation of the Russian Federation. Not that we can go back in time, but the general ability, the choice by various leaders I call them the Reagan generation, Mr. Gorbachev for one. The allowance of these states to leave were largely economic. Russia at the time broke off its poor satellite states to let them form countries because it was in their economic interest at the time. Now it's less so. It's also seen as something, again, buyer's remorse for allowing this to have happened. If you were going to reconstitute a state that you want to see as an empire, both Georgia, there's a couple of key players that Russia just, if you want to call it a state psychology. Ukraine's always been a bitter pill for them to swallow for independence. Latvia, Estonia are continuing to be bitter pills for them to swallow, as is Georgia. And those are going to be, bitter pills for quite a while. And we've seen in the last 30 years quite a bit of activity against those entities by Russian and pro-Russian forces. So this isn't really hard for people to figure out. This is people not liking in Russia, not liking what happened at the end of the Cold War. And America is seen as, again, if you want to claim America as the victor, the Cold War, whether or not we won or not is a matter of historic debate. But what happened to Russia in the wake of the Cold War is seen as largely a defeat of the Russian state and a failure of the Soviet Union. So for that reason, the reconstitution of some of that grandeur is something that many people, particularly what we consider Russian hardliners from that era, it's going to be something Putin is obviously wanting to do. And has buyers. Again, he didn't make those decisions back in the day. He may never have been a supporter of Ukrainian independence or Georgian independence. So for that reason, this seems like a natural thing to him. And there have been a long time. There have been hardliners within Russia, and both, the oligarchy who want to exploit Ukrainian and other resources for their own monetary and economic gain, and the state grandeur at the state level. Having these territories back under their control. Ukraine is not without significant financial interests. This is, the Russians aren't going to go in there and build churches and build hospitals. They're going to exploit the natural resources and the Ukrainian people for their own economic prosperity.
All right, last question from me, and then any more questions from Zandring, or another question or two from Zandring if he's got one, and then I think we'll head out. Last question, roughly, there may be a follow-up or two, but last question. You had said, if I recall correctly, last time you were here, that you anticipated essentially a new Cold War as a result of this, that possibly we would have both American and Russian soldiers, American vis-a-vis NATO, and Russian soldiers pointing guns at each other and the start of a new Cold War. Is that still your assessment, considering how much things have changed already? And if so, can you just briefly outline that once again, why we would end up that way?
I actually see each day this goes on, that likelihood is higher. So the longer Russian forces stay engaged in Ukraine, the higher likelihood we are to enter a continual and persistent state hostility against Russia. Because the longer war goes on, diplomatic channels tend to dry up and become less effective. So yes, I see not only a NATO coalition, I see the EU and several other exterior to NATO but allied with the European Union being at least willing to engage in a concerted anti-Russian or anti-Russian expansionist footing. I expect Russia's ability to import particularly electronics and to do certain forms of commodities brokering on the free market are going to end. The other actor that I don't think people are talking about, I know there was some activity in Taiwan with China, and that's just, again, China puffing up its chest. Whether or not they're planning on invading Taiwan, it's not something I'm ready to talk about. But the big telling factor is if you start seeing Chinese forces building along their northern border with Russia, that tells you that there's a lot of territory right now that have been in dispute between Russia and China for quite some time, that if Russia bogs down in Ukraine, China could use to pressure and annex. This is a big risk for Putin. His military, he's attempting to to quickly bite a piece of the pie without being called out for it. But if he gets bogged down in Ukraine, his position, actually, he may come out much weaker on the other end, particularly if this isn't resolved. Like I said initially, within 3 to 5 days, the siege of Ukraine isn't complete. If this bogs down into something longer than that, with the international community becoming involved, and again, how we're going to keep getting military war supplies, humanitarian aid into Ukraine seems to be somewhat difficult at this point, but I'm sure it's still occurring. This is all going to be part of it. And the important thing to remember is, despite what Russia's been saying, Ukraine is still being acknowledged as both their government that's in place and government outside, like through embassies, are still being the recognized government, despite Russian attempts to have other republics, regions of autonomy in the Ukraine declared. They haven't been acknowledged, which shows that at least the international community is not willing to even recognize these vassal satellites that were attempted to be created by Putin. So it shows that Putin may have miscalculated. But again, the only person that knows Putin is Putin.
Hendrik, any final thoughts?
I actually covered tangentially some of the things I was interested or curious about too was, how much support or opposition is China going to have? It seems like if China actually goes against Russia, that Russia doesn't really have any tenable position to continue on with much of anything, unless it stops. So it's like their only real avenue is to continue on, with all these sanctions is through China. So I think that's going to be an interesting thing to see how that plays out. Is China going to support Russia in this, or is there going to be elevated tensions?
The relations between Russia and China historically have been very bad, and in particularly, China is almost more disposed, because of their integration into world economies, towards America. Like, if Russia had to choose an ally, we're probably more likely choice than, depending on what conflicts of interest we may have. But Russia is a constant thorn in their side. You were talking 50 to 60 years of tension between the two countries emerging out of the 1950s and 60s. So I think that's important too. China may just decide there's hundreds of miles of territory that we've been disputing with Russia for quite some time. And China, unlike Russia, has the military capabilities to do something limited and quick and be successful, because a lot of the areas that are in dispute between Russia and China are sparsely occupied. So it's not like they're going to, other than drive tanks and set up new border checkpoints, the Chinese are well within their military capabilities to do that. I don't think there's a lot Russia could do.
Yeah, that was one of my wonderful. I mean, they've in recent years they've been a little bit more open towards like trading with each other and amongst each other, especially in commodities, trying to avoid the U.S. dollar. But they have historically not been particularly friendly towards each other. So I have a feeling that especially with a lot of the sanctions and some of the things being threatened against Russia currently, that what China does I think is going to be pretty important to the success or failure of what Russia's trying to do. And that's above and beyond what NATO actually decides to do, depending upon how actions evolve in Ukraine. I was just wondering.
Yeah. Interestingly, the one country that's been really quiet for the last 24 hours is Turkey. If you've noticed, Turkey's been very, very quiet. The few press releases they've had is they're observing the situation in Ukraine. That Turkey is probably a bigger player than even China at this point, because Turkey is that one group positioned on the Black Sea, that one NATO ally or one NATO member that has very pro-Russian sympathies that they do not appear to be expressing. So that may have been, I would watch also what happens with Turkey within the next 24 to 48 hours and seeing how they position themselves as well. As a former, again, they're very sympathetic, but Erdogan is not someone that is going to tie himself to a sinking ship if he sees Putin sinking.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Pat, for joining us. We're going to be doing an overtime every night, I think, for the foreseeable future. So I hope you will be available to come back in the future. We try to do them a bit earlier, but the After Dark preempted us slightly.
Yeah, and to be fair, I was talking to my wife about this earlier. I'm just old enough to remember the ending of the Vietnam era war footage as a kid, where it was played every night. And this has brought back memories of that, a war far away that I didn't understand, because this thing in Ukraine is just, if you would have told me 10 years ago when I was first going to Romania that I was going to have to worry about what was going on in the Ukraine, I would have called you crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, you brought up some interesting points in the past, because I've managed to discuss it intermittently, and I think there's stuff to talk about. So, thank you very much. What I think we're going to do now, I don't see. Yes, I'm sorry. Is entering?
Oh, I say you bring up crazy, and it seems there's a lot of that going around.
I agree. Well, and this, again, not to blame. I'm taking too much time. This is my last final statement. If anybody thinks that the last administration in the U.S. last 4 years prior to the current president isn't the key reason this is happening in Ukraine, you do not understand European, particularly Eastern European policy. Like, Trump is the reason this occurred. Yeah, and that's it.
Okay. Thank you very much. But I think that's actually worthy of a discussion at some point. So maybe we can book that for next week too, if you're free. But overtime will be continuing basically every single night for the next foreseeable future. We do this every time there's something worthy of doing it for. So
good night, everybody.
Night, Pat. Thank you so much. So anybody who wants to join us for that, please just keep an eye, and then you can always join us on the Discord and keep up with what we're doing there. In the meantime, we're not going to be resuming our normal schedule, at least in the immediate future. Xandering, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, everybody who was participating in the After Dark. I think that was one of the better ones that we've had in a while. So I really appreciate that. And if there is anything breaking, we will, as always, go to it as soon as we are capable. So in the meantime, thank you once again to everyone who has joined, and we will be seeing you all tomorrow night. Stay safe and take care.
May you live in interesting times.
Oh, no shit. So, okay, I'll stop. I was like, you know what? I don't think I want that to be my last assist. You said that, I was just like, no shit. And I was like, wait, am I going to go to credits immediately after saying leave that as the last line? No, why don't you say that one more time, and we'll let that take us out.
May you live in interesting times.